Chapter 151. Shizun, I only want you. As his thoughts wandered widely, Chu Wanning heard Moran say in a low voice, "What do you think you're looking at? It's not like that. Now take your clothes and get lost." Chu Wanning paused. "Huh? What did I look at?" Moran went silent. In the room, Chu Wanning stared at his cousin's face, trying to figure it out, until it suddenly clicked. He hollered in a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "The hell are you thinking about? I was gonna say, with your door locked and all, were you just going to settle for a bath in here? 'Cause you didn't want to crowd with everyone in the public baths. You're the one with the mind in the gutter. How dare you turn it around on me?" One room over, Chu Wanning's face darkened. Mind in the gutter. Chu Wanning heaved a lengthy sigh and looked Moran up and down, glaring the whole time. "I wasn't even thinking about that. But since you brought it up, were you really? Weren't you going to take a bath? What are you still doing here running your mouth for?" "No, but, I really think you're acting kinda suspicious." Moran's unfriendly tone and his dark eyes, almost crackling with sparks, only made Chu Wanning all the more skeptical. "You practically lived at the brothels back when you first came of age, but I've heard nothing of your philandering ways while you were traveling around these last couple years. Why'd you turn over a new leaf all of a sudden, huh?" No reply from Moran. Chu Wanning waited in the silence. He wanted to know Moran's answer too. The longer it dragged, the more anxious Chu Wanning became. Why wasn't Moran saying anything? Embarrassment? Remorse? Or, "You really want to know?" Moran finally spoke, the anger plain in his voice. He actually has the nerve to be angry? Chu Wanning was frankly impressed. He thought Chu Wanning's question was perfectly reasonable. "Don't get upset because someone dug up your sordid past and tried to sweep everything under the..." Before he could finish the thought, he heard Moran finally speak. "I had my fill of fucking and got bored of it, alright? Now kindly piss off." Chu Wanning was dumbfounded. From the silence on the other side of the wall, Chu Wanning was the same. The silence stretched for a long, long moment. Then Chu Wanning roared, so loud the entire inn probably heard. "Who are you, you shameless dog? Absolute scum!" Sure, whatever you say. Now get the fuck out and let me go back to sleep." "Don't touch me! Gross!" "How am I gross?" "You..." In the room, Chu Wanning stuttered, his handsome little face bright red. He had tried to put Moran on the spot, but the latter's shamelessness had unexpectedly put him in the hot seat instead. He couldn't help thinking that he was already in his 20s. Among his peers, Nangongsi was marrying the number one beauty of the cultivation world. The fourth Gongse of Jiangdong Hall was already a father to 3 children, and that Mei Hanshur of Kunlun Tashur Palace. Mei Hanshur, surprisingly, had yet to die of a venereal disease. It seemed that Chu Wanning was the only inexperienced virgin left. So Chu Wanning was indignant. Not for perverse reasons. In fact, he had no raunchy desires whatsoever. But he felt like he had fallen behind Moran in this aspect, and not just by a little either. So he was outraged. If Moran had avoided the question, if he had been abashed, Chu Wanning probably would have felt differently. But Moran had only looked disdainful and impatient as he tossed out a "had my fill of fucking, got bored." Young Master Shure couldn't take it. It was too much of a blow to his ego. He stammered futilely for a time before shouting furiously at him. "Anyway, you're gross, you depraved piece of trash." He slammed the door on his way out. Chu Wanning was at a bit of a loss as well. He was more collected than Chu Wanning and could tell Moran was deliberately provoking him out of irritation. Still, he couldn't help the tides surging in him, the rushing torrents that refused to recede. The man in the other room had used such crude words, spoken in a low snarl, like that of a jungle lion, muscles strong and defined, breath steaming. That deep bellow shaping those vulgar words formed a hot, thick fire iron that jabbed right into his heart. Chu Wanning swallowed, eyes dark and gleaming. Moran had been admonished for going to brothels before, so Chu Wanning was abundantly aware that he wasn't some innocent like Chu Meng. But back then, Moran had not been so irresistibly alluring as to tempt him into giving it much thought, into imagining those kinds of scenes despite himself. Now that it had been brought up again, Chu Wanning couldn't help envisioning that body he'd seen, that steaming, sleek, well-built body in that foggy mist, a body that had once been tangled with those delicate, soft and lovely boys, had once ravished those fair-skinned youths. He burned with anger, yet his heart felt tickled as if by a feather. Steeped in rage and yearning, the corners of Chu Wanning's eyes grew red, a tinge of high-tongue in the black of night. Chu Meng returned to Moran's room. "Open the door." "What is it now?" "I got distracted arguing with you. Where are my clothes?" "On the table. Get them yourself." Holding his clothes, Chu Meng left in a huff. Things finally quietened down this time. Chu Wanning heard Moran's heavy footsteps, followed by a muffled creak from the bed. This time, he really, unmistakably heard the man in the other room lie back down. He even thought he felt the bed shake as it supported that solid, fiery body. He felt parched and wanted to get up for a cup of water. But since he could hear Moran lie down, he knew Moran would definitely hear if he were to get up. So he stayed perfectly still, like one of the famous rocks of Mount Dantia, ice cold on the outside, but brilliantly vibrant within. On the other side of the wall, Moran was restless. Men with unfulfilled needs tended to be irritable, and Chu Meng had to pick that exact moment to pester him. He had lost his head during the bickering and yelled something shameless. He wondered if Chu Wanning had heard. He definitely would have if he wasn't asleep. The more he thought about it, the more he regretted it, rolling this way and that on the bed. On the other side of the wall, Chu Wanning listened to the creaking sounds and felt his unease grow as well. A few seconds later, Chu Wanning heard Moran say in a low voice, "Shizun." Startled, Chu Wanning froze. Still unable to settle even after all that tossing and turning, Moran tried calling to Chu Wanning to see if he would respond. "Shizun, are you asleep?" Of course, Chu Wanning didn't reply. "Can you hear me?" Chu Wanning's heart beat like thunder. Embarrassed at how loud it was pounding, he quietly tucked the quilt over his head in an effort to muffle the sound Moran couldn't hear to begin with. "Shizun." Under the quilt, with Moran's voice so close, it was as if they were lying on the same bed. As if, were Chu Wanning to lift the covers, he would see Moran's handsome face as he reclined on his side, bare-chested, his cheek propped in one hand, as he watched Chu Wanning with those bright, pitch-black eyes of his, those bestial and hungry eyes that threatened to swallow him whole. "Can you hear me?" Chu Wanning decided he would pretend not to hear. He knew well that Moran was asking in the hopes that he couldn't hear. Otherwise, it would be awkward for both of them tomorrow. In a low voice, Moran called out to him several more times. When he heard nothing from Chu Wanning's side, he let out a quiet sigh. Thinking Chu Wanning really was asleep, Moran felt relieved, but also a little wistful. He wanted Chu Wanning to pay him attention, but Chu Wanning paid him none, so he could only touch the thin wall between them, stroking it with calloused fingers, closing his eyes and pretending it was Chu Wanning's chest he was caressing. He pressed his heated lips against it, murmuring softly, as if whispering against Chu Wanning's lips. "I don't want any of that anymore." Moran said, "I only want you." He spoke so softly that Chu Wanning didn't hear at all. Bundled in the quilt, Chu Wanning's heart felt as hot as his face. A few minutes passed, then he heard a loud creak from the bed on the other side of the wall, as if the person on it was very agitated and had rolled over angrily. He heard him say, "Fuck." Chu Wanning suddenly had a feeling, an animalistic sixth sense, that he was about to hear something. For an instant, all his hair stood on end. He thought he should cover his ears, but his fingers barely twitched. At a loss, he stared blankly at the underside of the quilt. A moment later, he heard it. Moran was breathing heavily. There was a rhythm to it, heated and vigorous. Goosebumps rose all along Chu Wanning's arms. The sounds melted his spine and made his back numb. Moran's panting was so sensual and sinful, guttural noises that were stifled yet unbridled at once. These sounds left him with no ambiguity as to what Moran was doing. Chu Wanning closed his eyes. He felt like he couldn't breathe. His lips parted lightly, trembling. He remembered that erotic dream he'd had so many times before. In it, he'd seen Moran's entire body exposed, nothing left to the imagination. Shutting his eyes only made it easier to imagine what was happening outside the cocoon of his quilt. It was as if Moran was lying on his back right next to him, firm, toned body stretched out, light dancing in those dark, narrowed eyes. Moran's hand reached down and unfastened his trousers, and that potent length sprang up. Chu Wanning didn't dare think too deeply about what that massive thing would look like, how swollen and red it must be, leaving it as a rough silhouette in his mind. Moran's hand worked over that lethal object, the jut of his throat rolling with every swallow. There was no telling of whom he thought as he stroked his own cock feverishly, painfully. At the low groan from the other side of the wall, husky and sensual, Chu Wanning's scalp went numb, those phoenix eyes hazy with lust in the darkness. He, too, could no longer bear it. After a long, tortuous moment, the Yuheng elder's fair, slender hand reached down and, trembling, took hold of his own burning arousal. That heft of it in his hand, hot and thick, brought both shame and pleasure. His head tilted back ever so slightly, and he suppressed a gasp. Under the cover of the quilt, he relinquished that exterior of cold virtue and drifted in the sounds of Moran's heavy breathing, allowing himself to be dragged down into the ocean of desires. He handled himself roughly and clumsily, even hurting himself several times, until he really couldn't take it anymore and abruptly flung off the quilt. He got on top of it, rubbing and grinding against its fabric, long, slender legs trembling uncontrollably, phoenix eyes half-lidded behind those loose strands of sweat-soaked hair, lips parted as he panted soundlessly. Perhaps being suddenly exposed to the open air made the noises clearer, or perhaps the heady arousal made the noises blurrier, but he seemed to hear the sound of something slick. He thought it was coming from Moran's side beyond the wall, but when he looked down, he saw that his hardness was leaking at the tip, smearing across his hand and making those unbearably lewd sounds. Chu Wanning felt his cheeks blaze with heat. He turned his head away from the wall so that it would feel like Moran was lying naked beside him, and they were stroking one another in mutual pleasure. Loftiness and reservations were left behind in his lust-addled state, and all he knew was the harsh breathing from across the wall and the intoxicating friction beneath his body. His lack of experience left him defenseless against the carnal stimulation, and every inch of his skin felt aflame, just as a well that stood dry for 100 years longed for water. Chu Wanning craved the touch of another warm body. As the pants from across the wall quickened, Chu Wanning felt his heart burn and his body grow pliant. His legs were on the verge of giving out. The sheets beneath him were already wet with fluid. Blearily, he thought that this was all so ridiculous, that he really shouldn't. But he couldn't help it. It felt too good. In all his years, he'd never tried doing this. Didn't even know that anything could feel this pleasurable. When he'd gotten himself off in Yuliang village, he had been tormented over breaking his abstinence for the first time, had loathed and been disgusted by himself. But this time, across a wall from the person he liked, listening to the stifled sound of that person's heated breathing, he suddenly no longer found these carnal matters so ugly. He allowed himself to float in the ocean of desires, to feel pleasure rather than revulsion. A few errant locks of hair fell over his teary, heavy-lidded eyes. His gaze lost focus, and for some reason, a bizarre vision flashed before him. Or perhaps not a vision, but the strange, all-too-realistic dream he'd had in the past. The bedding in the dream had been red and gold, with an animal pelt spread on the sheets that he could practically smell. He'd been face down on that bed, as he was now, forehead sheened with sweat, lips slightly parted, hair similarly undone and loose over his eyes. The candle had been left burning, and the man behind him drove into him, fast and rough, the legs tangled. He could clearly feel the man's body, muscles taut with pleasure. The sheets and blankets were in disarray. The man panted sensually and hoarsely as he thrust in and out, and Chu Wanning could hear him say, "What are you holding back for? Make some noise for me." Dream overlapped with reality. Chu Wanning gritted his teeth and tilted his face away, refusing to make a sound, even as the heat built low in his belly, and his need grew until it was nearly unbearable. He closed his eyes, and his hand below moved yet more roughly. He closed his eyes, but couldn't unsee those erotic dreams. The man thrust in a few more times, then cursed under his breath and pulled out. He forced Chu Wanning to turn over, and in the candlelight, Chu Wanning saw a handsome, lust-filled face. Seeing Moran so clearly in the dream only intensified Chu Wanning's arousal and torment. He shook his head in shame, trying to free himself from the vision, but it was useless. He heard Moran's panting across the wall, low and throaty, just like the cruel yet tender man in those dreams. Despicably, Chu Wanning recalled further details of that dream. Moran flipping him over and pressing his still wet cock to Chu Wanning's entrance, which was clenching down spasmodically, uncontrollably, from such thorough use. Its massive head rubbed against its opening, dipping in enough to tease, but no further. Within the inn, Chu Wanning's other hand fisted tightly in the sheets. Shameful. It was too shameful. How could he possibly dream something like that? He'd never looked at any of those things. So how could he dream so vividly of such affairs, as if his body really had experienced such fevered yet frenzied, ugly yet intimate encounters? Could this be the bestial nature carved into the bones of every human? In the dream, Moran's eyes shone, his expression sinister and avaricious. "Holding out on me? You really think biting through your lip to keep quiet will save your purity? I fucked you so many times. What's the point in struggling? You're the one who willingly let me fuck you. You're the one who willingly submitted to me. Stop." Chu Wanning murmured, both in the dream and in reality. "So what if you're noble and virtuous? You were still dirtied by me in the end. Didn't you take me into your mouth and suck me off? Didn't you spread your legs and let me fuck you? Wasn't what leaked out from between your legs my gift to you? Pure? Don't be stupid. That word has never applied to you since the day I bedded you. Stop talking." Pure no longer. pride ripped apart like his robes. "You should see what you look like down here." Moran's gaze dragged downward, like a dagger eviscerating the man beneath him, until his eyes landed on that quivering, clenched hole, still sticky from their earlier union, traces of blood visible amidst the other fluids. His eyes darkened, and the jut of his throat bobbed as he swallowed. Then he swore under his breath and took his engorged cock in hand. He pushed slowly into that twitching entrance, stretching it ruthlessly open, inch by quivering inch. It was strange, but lost in his memories of that dream, Chu Wanning felt as if he really could feel a thick, hard staff of flesh tearing him apart, filling him. Moran sank all the way in, so deep his balls were pressed tightly against Chu Wanning's entrance, as though he wanted to shove them in too. His massive length filled Chu Wanning to his limit, pulsing inside him. He was sure he couldn't take one more bit of this violation. Oh! Was it in a dream or in reality? A moan finally escaped his throat, jolting Chu Wanning out of his trance. The mirage dissipated in an instant, fading like mist. The last thing he saw was Moran driving into him, fast and rough, the two of them fucking frantically atop the bed as he heard Moran say, between heavy breaths, voice raw and heated, "If you were a woman, I would have knocked you up long ago. The way I fuck you like this every day. Our child would be quite the abomination, don't you think?" Shame, arousal, beastly desire, human nature. Inside the inn, Chu Wanning turned over, trying to shake himself free of the filthy scene in his mind. He felt aggrieved, and the rims of his eyes were tinged with red. Why was this happening? He never used to have dreams like these. He'd never looked at anything he shouldn't. He'd never even seen a pornographic drawing. So why should he have such ridiculous, wanton dreams? What would he do if anyone were to find out? The memories of that dream receded, but the bed in the other room suddenly began to rock. Moran had been working over his cock for quite a while, before Chu Wanning had even begun. The heat had been building this whole time, and he was so close to the edge. Moran couldn't help but buck his hips, thrusting upward. He'd gone without for so long that when he came, it was with a low, guttural roar. The muffled sound sent heat spiraling down Chu Wanning's spine. Eyes cheery and red-rimmed, he stroked himself roughly and followed suit soon enough, coming all over the bedding. He'd never experienced such an intense climax, and he couldn't help the low shout that tore itself from his throat as he came, gasping. His vision blurred with his release. Chu Wanning couldn't understand how he'd managed to fall into this sticky, messy love. Unable to summon any strength, it was all he could do to lie there, eyes unfocused, as he panted quietly. He rejected carnal desires, but he'd willingly fallen in love. And when desire and love wove together, passions of the flesh seemed less unacceptable. So his response this time was different from the frustration and despair he'd felt in Yuliang village. The shame was still there, but it was washed away by the tender feelings in his heart, drowned by pleasure and arousal. Chu Wanning suddenly wanted nothing more than for that wooden wall between them to vanish. He wanted Moran, sweat-soaked and panting as he was, to reach over and press his hot, heaving chest against his back, to kiss his shoulder and mouth along his neck. As he lay there limply, staring off into space, Chu Wanning thought that, if only this were so, then everything would be perfect. He would be content. Moran rose early the next day. He knew that this was Linie, and Chu Wanning wouldn't like the food here. The inn didn't offer much in the way of mild dishes, so he set off for the Western market and bought some ingredients, intending to borrow the inn kitchen to personally cook a few things for his Shizun. There were some men who pulled out all the stops to woo someone, who might cook a full banquet for breakfast, but who would give up and walk away at the first sign that their affection might not be returned. There were so many beauties in the world. Why waste time on someone they had no chance with? Moran wasn't like that. He'd spent 2 lifetimes chasing after Shimei. He finally understood his own feelings, and he also understood that in this lifetime, he and Chu Wanning could never be more than master and disciple. Even so, he wanted to care for Chu Wanning every day, to be perfectly aware that something was impossible, but to go ahead and do it anyway. In this, Moran had never changed, in life or in death. "Gongse, out shopping so early? Check out my fresh radishes. Why not buy some?"
"Gongse, I have all sorts of jewelry here. Bracelets, necklaces, hairpins and accessories, you name it. They're all finely made."
"Come look, come see. All kinds of spiritual stones and weapons. Come, come." Moran had only planned to get some groceries, but as he passed a general store with his basket full of vegetables, he saw a row of pretty little trinkets laid out on a stand. One in particular caught his eye, and he found himself wandering over before he knew it. Another man stood near the stand, the hood of his cloak pulled up as he looked over the glittering goods on display. The man lifted a hand, revealing smooth and lovely bone-pale fingers beneath loose black sleeves. It was these fine, delicate fingers that drew Moran's attention. Based on the person's build, he'd taken them for a man, but the slenderness of that hand made him think they might be a woman instead. Curiosity drove him to try for a better look at their face, but it was shrouded by a veil of black silk. Only a pair of cold eyes were visible, obscured by the shadow of the cloak's voluminous hood. The eyes met. Out of habit, Moran smiled. The cloaked person swiftly retracted their hand, which had been reaching for a spiritual stone on the stand. From the corner of his eye, Moran caught a glimpse of a ring on that pale thumb. It was patterned with a silver serpent, covered in intricate scales. He felt he'd seen this pattern somewhere before, but just as he went to take a closer look, the person tucked their hand back into their sleeve. They cast Moran an indifferent glance, then turned and left without a word. "What a weirdo," Moran muttered. Then again, Rufengsek's young master was getting married, and wedding invitations had been sent out en masse. All sorts of peculiar people had been gathering in Linyi of late, so it wasn't so strange to see someone cloaked from head to toe on the street. The wind chimes hanging from the store's back door rang, and the curtain rose and fell as the shop's mistress came out. Moran mentally discarded the matter of the black-robed person and pointed at an enchanted item on display, smiling as he asked, "How much for this one?"